is Alexandra Politidis-Palm, and I will be the chair of this session. Before we start, we have the usual information that I will want to remind you that this session will be recorded, however, not the Q&A part of the session. This is a panel speaking, so please be aware that the Q&A part will take place in the end of the session, and please feel free to ask questions to our great panelists in the Q&A part of the screen. Yes, there will be no possibility to pose an oral question. It's not only written questions. And I want to remind you that information about our panelists and this session is available at the Sojika website. And I will also say that the panelists have been given 15 minutes each, and then the rest of the time will be for the Q&A session. I also want to give a special thanks to our facilitator, Melody Greaves, who will be helping us with the technical stuff. Now to the session and the topic of this session, which I think is personally very, very important when talking about LGBTQI issues within the asylum process and the asylum system. And I'm looking forward to hearing these experts giving their insights on this very, very interesting topic. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Stephanie Huber. And Stephanie is a foundation director at the, or director at the Asylum Research Center Foundation. And she's a COI specialist for over 12 years of experience of conducting COI research for use in the refugee status determination process. And over 9 years of experience of undertaking COI reviews for various national and international bodies. So Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexandra, for this introduction, and hello, everyone. So this technology, let's see whether I can make it work. I just want to get my screen up. There we go. So I think you should have the slides up now. So great. Yeah, as Alexandra said, I'm co-director of ARC Foundation. It's a UK charity working to improve standards in refugee determination procedures by ensuring that legal representatives, decision makers and policy makers have access to high quality country of origin information. Some of you may be familiar with the terminology COI, but for those that may not so, it might be a relatively new concept. So I just want to quickly explain what country of origin information is. You might also hear it referred to as COI or COI, it's all the same. We just love acronyms. So country of origin information is basically information on the country of origin, formal habitual residence or transit, and it can include information on the human rights situation, ethnicity and religion, culture and societal attitudes, on the availability of state protection and internal flight. But really it's a really important element in the asylum process, as it helps to evaluate whether there is a well-founded risk of persecution or serious harm if the person would be returned to his or her country of origin. COI is also used in other circumstances, for example, when decision makers consider exclusion or cessation of refugee status, in human rights claims, in claims for complementary forms of protection, and to convince legal representatives of the merits of a claimant's case before they take on the case. It can also assist with credibility assessments, as we've already heard in today's and yesterday's presentations. It can also be very useful for familiarizing oneself with country conditions as a legal representative, but also as a decision maker before, for example, interviewing an applicant for the first time, to better understand their account, or then also to be able to ask more pertinent questions from an early stage on. There are 5 main quality criteria or principles for researching COI, and presenting the research results, which also apply to the assessment of country of origin information by a decision maker. So firstly, we've got relevance. So the COI needs to be relevant to the individual circumstances of the applicant and to the issues raised by the case. So for example, to assess whether a lesbian may have a well-founded fear of persecution in her country of origin, information about the treatment of gay men may be of limited relevance. On the other hand, information on the situation and treatment of women who do not conform to gendered stereotypes may be useful, as might be information on single women living on their own without a male partner. Secondly, the sources should be reliable. So every source, as we know, has a political and ideological context. There might be a specific mandate, reporting, methodology, and motivation behind what they report on. And this should be assessed when selecting a source. The biases should be explained, and a range of sources ideally should be included. Thirdly, the COI has to be correct and valid at the time of researching. Fourthly, the information you collect needs to be traceable back, if possible, to the original or primary source, so that it can be independently verified and assessed by any reader. And lastly, the COI research is intended to be neutral and impartial. So it's not the role of COI researchers to provide any opinions or analysis of the situation in the country of origin. The aim of the COI research is not necessarily also to support an account, but to provide the information, and then which allows hopefully the lawyers, decision makers, and judges to make a very informed decision. In order to ensure that these quality criteria are met, we need to conduct a source assessment, which is like the process of thoroughly and critically evaluating a source against the quality criteria I've just mentioned. So in practice, to evaluate a source, you should always ask yourself the following questions. Who provides the information and what is their mandate? What information is provided and what shape does it come in? Is it, for example, a media article, an eyewitness account, or a press release? Why is the source providing this information and what is the motivation of the author? How is the information generated? What is their methodology? Is the language and style of writing neutral or biased? And how is the information presented? Lastly, when was the information gathered and when was it published? However, it is important to remember that a biased approach, so even a negative source assessment, need not be a ground for disqualification of the source. In such cases, it can be mitigated by corroborating information with that of other sources, or balancing sources by using a diverse range of source types. So for example, governmental, NGOs, international organizations, media. Which actually brings me to the final part of my presentation. And I would like to share with you preliminary findings of a research project I'm involved in, which is looking at the US Department of State's annual human rights reports. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that particular source. And whilst it is intended to be relied upon to inform American foreign policy and aid decisions, it is also used as a tool for human rights defenders and governments around the world to highlight human rights abuses and to hold regimes to account. And as probably most of you may know, it also carries a lot of weight in the refugee status determination process throughout the world, and is regularly cited in state, country-specific asylum policy, country reports, and also COI products by EASO and UNHCR. The reason being that it's very user-friendly, and every country report follows a similar format and has section headings that are easily identifiable. So it's kind of the go-to source for anyone in the refugee status determination process, and particularly decision makers in legal reps. So when in 2017, the US State Department published its reports, we noticed that they became shorter and removed or watered down some human rights practices. We also noticed that the current US administration, the mission statement of the department who writes these reports, has actually shifted away from shaping peace and democracy around the world to more narrowly advancing interests of the American people. So we decided to conduct a very line-by-line analysis, I can see here on the slide, of 5 of the 2016 reports produced under the former Obama administration, compared to those published in the 4 subsequent years under the current Trump administration, to highlight changes in respect to the structure of the report, so where the sections have been omitted, for example, language used or changes in terminology, omissions of human rights issues, or even improvements in the human rights situation. We then investigated whether such changes were reflective of the reported situation on the ground as documented by other publicly available English-speaking sources. We focused on the top 5 nationalities of asylum seekers in the UK over the past few years. So we looked at Eritrea, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, and Sudan. And for this particular session, I'm just going to focus our findings in relation to one of the subsections, which is on acts of violence, discrimination, and other abuses based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So we found that with regards to the structure of the report, there's much less details included in the reports produced under the Trump administration compared to the previous report. So for example, whilst the 2016 report on Iraq sets out the legal framework pertinent for LGBTI persons, the 2017 report has completely removed this information, and the 2018 and 19 reports contain less detail than the 2016 report. We've also noticed that they've started using some distancing language to previously made assertions. What I mean by that is that, for example, by adding words such as according to a wide range of LGBT NGOs and activists, which you can see here, they've included in the 17, 18, 19 reports on Pakistan, it can be read to imply that these violations, which they also recorded in 2016, might not have occurred, and so cast doubt on the veracity of reporting. On occasion, general patterns of human rights violations were no longer described, but rather individual incidents were included, thereby potentially undermining the regularity of the incidents. So in this example, the 2019 report on Iraq no longer mentions that, and I quote, LGBTI persons remained at risk of honor crimes, although it did include specific examples of such incidents. We've also noticed a removal of previously made assessments. So in this rather long quote, I do apologize, the 2018 report on Iran stated that corrective treatment of LGBTI persons constitute torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment under international law. The 2019 report, while also reporting on corrective treatment, no longer included such an assessment and actually remained silent. We've also identified instances where human rights violations against LGBTI persons were omitted, and this is despite contrary information available at the time of drafting the relevant US State Department reports documenting that such violations continued. And here's just an example. So for example, the Eritrea report no longer includes information on lack of state protection for LGBTI persons. There's also no information on the situation and treatment of LGBTI organizations in the Iraq report. And this is, of course, always compared to the 2016 report, so under the previous administration. We've also noticed a watering down of human rights abuses, which is not reflective of improvements on the ground. So in this example, on Sudan, the first one you can see on your slide, whilst the 2016 to 2018 reports note that several LGBTI persons felt compelled to leave the country due to fear of persecution, intimidation, or harassment, the 2019 changed it to under the Bashir regime, several LGBTI persons felt compelled to leave, suggesting that since April 2019, when the former President Bashir was ousted from power, the situation has improved for LGBTI persons. But actually, we didn't find any information to support such an assertion, and nothing documenting an improvement for LGBTI persons. We also noticed a softening of language when reporting on human rights abuses. Again, it could be implied to an improvement in the situation. So for example, with regards to Pakistan, whilst the 16 and 17 reports on Pakistan stated that police refused to take action when receiving reports of LGBTI crimes, the 2018 and 19 reports noted that police took little action in such instances. So it's just a really subtle language change, but important enough that might have implications on how somebody assesses effective protection or the effectiveness of protection. So there are many more examples that I could show you and additional trends covering other pertinent issues and profiles. But I think I'll leave it at this for now. They will all feature in our final publication, which should hopefully be available after the summer. And we'll also be publishing subsequent editions of this review once the 2020 reports are out, which is probably next year, and also more thematic analysis, something like today. So if you would like to receive notifications, then please join our mailing list, or also feel free to drop me an email if you would like further information. But I believe there's time at the end for the Q&A session if you have a question relating to this now. Thank you. Let me just get out. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was a great introduction and a very, very disturbing example of your findings. And I'm sure that everyone has a lot of questions for you. So I encourage the audience here to start writing their questions. Yes. Thank you very, very much. And we will go directly to our second speaker, and it is Adriana van der Berg. And she is a COI information officer at the European Asylum Support Office, EASO. She has a PhD in social anthropology and history with a specialization in gender in Africa. Previously, she's been working at the Dutch Immigration Neutralization Service as a COI officer and as a consultant in international development. The floor is yours, Adriana.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Melody to share the screen? Because apparently my presentation was so heavy that I couldn't share it myself. So yeah, I just asked Melody to click on the screens. As an introduction, I must say I thank you very much to Stephanie, because she gave a very thorough introduction to what is COI, and that saves me time to so that I don't need to go into that. I will speak briefly about what the European Asylum Support Office, or EASO, is doing on COI, and especially on in relation to the LGBTI issues. And Melody, can you click please on the next one? Just click on, yeah, okay. So this is what I'm going to tell you briefly. First, what is EASO, what can we do, and what's our mandate? Then what do we do in relation to COI support? And then specifically on the EASO research guide on LGBT persons. Next, please. Yeah, so EASO's mandate is well, to be a center of expertise and to contribute to the implementation of the common European asylum system. You've all heard these 2 days about this CEAS, and we are the agency that is supposed to contribute and to support all the member states to have a common system on asylum. That means in practice that the idea that individual asylum cases are dealt with in a coherent and a common way by all member states. This is, of course, well, it's not yet the case at the moment, but this is our mandate and this is our aim. We work from a bottom-up approach. That means that we give trainings and we give support to caseworkers, legal officers, COI researchers, etc. So that from the bottom up, the idea of common asylum is being developed. it remains the responsibility of the member states to assess their national cases and their evidence assessment and to make decisions at the level, at the national level. I think it's good to emphasize that. Our mandate is to support and to stimulate the common quality of the asylum process by common training, quality tools, and also common country of origin information. And our specific mandate for COI includes to gather information and produce information on persons belonging to vulnerable groups. That is a specific group defined in the regulations to which LGBTI persons and SOGI issues are included. Next, please. So also in the EU roadmap that was specifically adapted in 2014, it is specifically mentioned that the legal and social situation of LGBTI persons in their countries of origin should be systematically documented and made available. So that is a clear mandate and task for us, which we take very seriously. Next. And this is still what, in brief, what we're doing. We work very methodologically and have developed several methodologies on writing reports on COI, on performing COI research, specifically also a research guide on SOGI topics. And we organize annually methodological conferences for all caseworkers and COI researchers in Europe to enhance the methodological knowledge and experience in Europe. We develop, one of our units is a country guidance sector that develops guidance notes on several countries which are high in the top 10, Afghanistan, Syria, Nigeria, Iraq until now. And then further we have some, there are some other units in the EASO that are working on guidance, on inclusion, on evidence assessment, on how to treat vulnerable groups or how to approach them, all these other things. So these are, in general, in brief, what EASO is doing in a guidance and a methodological way. Next. Okay. There should be a little bit more. Okay, well, this slide, this is specifically on COI. What we do, we have, you can say it is four elements of our COI support. First, we produce COI reports and queries. Queries are more shorter and thematic fact sheets in which different topics are described, and among which also LGBTI issues. We also organize meetings with for the EASO specialist networks, COI specialist networks, sorry. And these meetings are organized with external experts and often with NGOs, specific NGOs on LGBTI, and organized with UN or UNICEF or UNHCR organizations. And lastly, we have organized this, developed this research guide on LGB, which I'm coming to later. Next, please. All these reports are available at our COI portal. Here's the web link. It is in public, the main part is public, so you can find and search different reports on, reports and queries on many variety of countries and topics. Next, please. And on our website, you can find all the country reports that we produced until now, which is a long list, much longer than this. Yes, next. So to concentrate more on the reports, this is more or less what was in the previous slide as well. What's basically a very important methodological part of our approach is that our COI reports, many of them are nowadays written as a basis for the country guidance notes that are being developed on the basis of our COI reports. And in these COI reports, there is a standard chapter for LGBTI, usually in the chapter on targeted persons, or in the specific report on targeted persons. And further on, we have country focus COI reports on a variety of countries which have very specific topics. So it's not a very overview report, but topical. And then we have queries on LGBTI and COI meetings. Next, please. It's a bit of a repetition of this one. So yeah, the COI reports, they contain a chapter on LGBTI. Most of these reports are ideally, they are all written in collaboration with COI researchers from other member states. So to make the whole, the collaboration level and the acceptance level within Europe broader. And it is in our task and in our mandate to collaborate with member states as much as possible. So not to produce these reports and these COI information as an EU agency on itself, but it's always in collaboration with member states as much as possible, either as drafters or as reviewers. There always has to be one or more member states involved in the production of these reports. So for the country guidance notes, I gave a couple of examples in which LGBTI are mentioned and discussed. So for Syria, it's Iraq, Nigeria, Afghanistan. It's all in the individuals targeted by several actors. Next, please. Okay, so this is the country focus reports, and there are some examples like Cote d'Ivoire, Russian Federation, the Gambia, and Bangladesh. There is more of that. You can all find them on our websites. Next. So this is a standard terms of reference that we use. It was developed on the basis of the research guide that I will talk about. So it's a legal framework, the state protection, the treatment by non-state armed groups, or the state treatment also by the state, whether it is state protection or harassment by the state, societal discrimination, and supporting organizations. That is the legal, and this is the standard terms of reference. Next, please. Here are some examples you can go through. Next. Yeah. Okay, so now the research guide. We developed this research guide on LGBT persons in 2015 on request of the COI researchers themselves. We noticed during a thematic meeting that COI researchers were really struggling with researching the situation of LGBT persons. They found it difficult to pose appropriate questions to interlocutors when they have the fact-finding missions. and which search terms they could be used, and yeah, also to how to assess sources when dealing with taboos or criminalization in certain countries of LGBT persons. So that's next, please. That made us to develop with a working group of COI researchers the research guide, a practical guide, the research situation of lesbian, gays, and bisexual persons in countries of origin. You see on the right part of the slide, part of the table of content. Next, please. So the aim and the scope, the aim is to identify and to share existing expertise and good practices at all levels. It was, as I said, developed by COI researchers from EU member states and specialized NGOs, in particular ORAM was involved. The focus is on sexual orientation only, lesbian, LGBT persons, because this is, at that time at least, were the most occurring profiles in the EU+. We also found that the research questions on transgender and intersex persons are different from research questions on sexual orientation, and we thought it would be better to exclude them rather than say, okay, we have a guide on LGBTI, but in practice it is only on LGB, and the TNI, we found it at that time it was too complicated to include them. We did include the TNI issues and organizations and sources in the list of sources and websites, and we kept the possibility open to update and expand the research guide in the future, which we had been discussing this year. So I fully agree that this is not a full research guide on the whole SOGI, on all the SOGI elements, and then all the persons related on the LGBTI persons. But at that time, we found it more appropriate and also more fair towards towards research questions, to limit the research questions to LGBT. Next, please. So the research guide contains some background information on SOGI, on overview of concepts and terms referring to LGBT, and also sometimes we take the TNI as well. Tips and sources for COI research, some local and self-identifying terms of LGBT persons. We gave some examples on terms that are used, for example, in several countries in Africa and in Asia. So this is to search for local, when you search in local sources, you need also to know the local terms that are used in the country by LGBT persons themselves. And we also gave some some self-identifying terms. Then we gave an outline of a COI report, a possible COI report, including research questions per topic. And then finally, a large annex of with a list of international, national, and specialized sources, including all the web links. This has to be updated anyways, because it is 5 years later. Next, please.
I also want to say that you have like 2-3 minutes left, Adriana.
Yes, okay, I'm nearly done. Thank you. So Finally, this year we conducted also a brief survey amongst EU plus COI units to ask for the current research experiences and challenges regarding LGBTI topics. And countries of origin for which COI research is challenging. And well, I give some examples here. The assessment of reliable information and sources is sometimes challenging, especially where LGBTI is taboo or criminalized. When NGOs cannot work freely and people cannot meet. Sometimes the sources are scarce, or only one or two NGOs are publicly present on the internet. It's often internet research. So that is a difficulty of detailed information, especially outside regions outside the main cities, and also outside the gay male communities. It is the experience of our research is that more general information is a bit biased towards male communities, and it is more difficult to find information on lesbians and bisexuals, and also on transgender and intersex persons. You need to know a bit more of the backgrounds and to get information. And in many countries, it's difficult to find information on these categories. Further, lack of information on persecution and violations of the human rights from society and family. Apart from some incidents, luckily there are many websites and organizations that document incidents, but it's sometimes difficult to find information. Also, information on state protection in practice. Apart from the legal provisions, how does it work in practice? That is difficult to find, and how researchers also find it sometimes difficult to deal with their own biases and taboos, which they have to deal with. And yeah, it is mentioned as a challenge for researchers. Next, please. So yeah, this is my final slide. We asked what do you want with the research guide? Do you use it? Do you want to update it, or do you want to expand it to the gender identity and expression sections? Well, they have used it mainly as an introduction to LGBT research, or as a guide. Updating particularly the annexes with sources and web links are worthwhile updating. And yeah, the majority of the persons answering our survey were quite positive in expanding the research guide to gender identity and expression. I must say we didn't yet follow up on this. This is a very fresh survey, and we didn't take any discussion yet or have discussed it further, but I can share this result of the survey. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriana. That was a very, very interesting presentation as well, and some insights in the work of VIASO. The questions, they keep coming, so and I'm a little bit worried about time though, but we're gonna manage, I think. For now we have our last speaker, Gabrielle Roth, and she has a degree in Middle Eastern Studies and has been a COI researcher for 4 years at ACCORD, which is the Austrian Center for Country of Origin and Asylum Research and Documentation. A department within the Austrian Red Cross that provides COI to all parties involved in the asylum process. procedures. So the floor is yours, Gabrielle.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thanks to Sajika for having me and for giving me the opportunity to speak about Accord and the work that we do. So I'm going to try to share my screen as well. Let's go back a moment. Yeah. So we heard something about, so Adriana mentioned the research methodology that EASO developed, and Stephanie mentioned source assessment, so like two very important aspects of how we approach our work. And what I want to talk about is how we deal with SOGI-related queries in practice and the difficulties that come up in our research for COI. So as Alexandra mentioned, we are a COI unit within the Austrian Red Cross. Just for a bit of perspective, so last year we had about 7 LGBTI-related research requests, and this year we've had about 2 to 3 so far. So and they have come from NGOs and decision makers alike, so both parts of the aisle, if you will. And I brought along an example that I'm going to talk about. It's a query response that we did on Iraq, on LGBTI persons in Iraq in 2018. So in general, the questions that we get in relation to this topic are usually kind of phrased like this. They go, what is the situation of LGBTI persons in this or that country? It would often, however, be more useful to ask more specifically for the situation, say, of gay men, of transgender persons, or of lesbians, for example, as these can face very different kinds of repercussions or abuse. So Stephanie was talking about what is a relevant question as well. So this is kind of ties into that. So sometimes we get back to our clients to see what the background of the case actually is. So if LGBTI identity is the substance or the core issue of this claim, then we can automatically derive from it some very important legal concepts. And they kind of guide and structure our research in every such case. And these concepts are, first of all, national law. So does national law punish certain SOGI expression or behavior or certain acts? Does it contain any discriminatory provisions? Does it stipulate cruel treatment? And then very importantly is as well, how is this law applied in practice? And then the second concept is the non-state actor. So is there a potential non-state actor of persecution? In Iraq, as in many other countries, I'm sure there are many options here. So is it a certain group? Is it an organization? Is it a party, a militia? Is it maybe the family or the wider clan or tribe that this person belongs to? What is the non-state actor's attitude towards LGBTI people? Is the actor in control of a certain state territory, or can he operate free from state intervention? Is he supported by society at large? And then we have the concept of state protection, which kind of can be separated into willingness and ableness. So willingness, do authorities actually intervene to prevent serious harm? What is the relationship between the state and the non-state actor? And then the ability to protect is, does the state actually have control? Are there functioning authorities? Is there access to law enforcement, so police and judicial institutions? And then last of all, we have the concept of internal flight alternative. So if state protection is not available, can an individual actually relocate to another area in the country that is safe, and can he build a life there? So these were the questions I wanted to find an answer to for my research into Iraq. And I started going through our database, ecoi.net, which is a COI database that contains kind of a broad mix of COI relevant sources. So you have some governmental, some non-governmental sources, some media, and products of different COI units with some very up-to-date information. And there's also like a thesaurus available that allows me to simultaneously search for all variants of LGBT according to what the different sources use. There, I did not find that much there, so there were no sources that would tell me anything about systematic targeted violence. There seems to be incidents, sort of campaigns targeting LGBTI individuals in certain years, and the ones responsible here seem to be paramilitary groups or militia. And I wasn't that surprised by the limited outcome. I knew I was dealing with a repressive environment. So as Adriana mentioned, underreporting is a problem for many SOGI-related searches because of the societal taboo that is attached to this issue. So I extended my search on Google, of course. So for finding anything in local media, I even have to consider using offensive terms for LGBTI because I know that local newspapers will use these terms. So sometimes I have to go with the Arabic word for deviant or abnormal, for example, because this sometimes yields results. Other than that, there are a few standard sources that I checked because I know that they have a section on LGBTI. So they contained sort of general statements like LGBTI persons often faced abuse and violence from family and non-governmental actors. So this is from the US Department of State report on human rights in 2017. But then the only detail that this report provided was one case of an actor / model being murdered. So not a lot of incidents there to back up that one general claim. And the same goes for the Freedom House report that I put in underneath, also from 2017. And this is fair enough because a report on the general human rights situation can't really get into all that detail. But in a COI query response, such as I was preparing, it's always kind of nice if you can back up a general statement with some individual incidents. So I kept on looking. And then I found a report by an LGBTI advocacy group, an Iraqi group, and it seemed kind of just the right source, and it says its report is based on interviews with LGBTI Iraqis, so perfect information gathered on the ground. The report, however, kind of comes right off the gate and says, every year since 2006, there has been at least one killing campaign targeting the LGBT+ community in Iraq. But again, as for concrete examples for such campaigns in the report, you only find information for the years 2009 and 2012. And these are the instances where Western media reported on these campaigns as well. And the other information was kind of given by LGBT informants. So I looked everywhere for corroborating information, but couldn't really find a source that paints a similar picture of the situation, especially something that would come close to a killing campaign, which sounds very much like organized systematic persecution. And such campaigns are mentioned by other sources, but again, only for the years 2009 and 2012. And then I was wondering, well, where are the records of individual cases for other years where narratives of victims? You know, normally such a targeted campaign would be picked up by international rights groups or Western press. And at this stage, I tried to find out more about the LGBTIQ advocacy group in question, so Iraqweer, and their method for reporting. So I did basically a source assessment, what Stephanie was mentioning before, so that when I include information by the source, I can give the reader an idea. But I didn't really have that much success on that front either. I only noticed that some human rights reports, such as the US Department of State report, as well as some Western media, rely to a large extent on information provided by this group whenever they report on the situation of LGBTI people in Iraq. So we end up in this kind of round-tripping situation where all the secondary sources refer back to the same primary source. So in the end, I decided I could not ignore this information provided by this LGBTIQ advocacy group because I knew that the COI product presented by me in the end would not be very useful to a decision maker. And why is that? Well, the decision maker can't really do a lot with general sweeping statements like SOGI expression is generally considered problematic because he or she has to decide whether the individual cases reported reach a certain threshold and together amount to targeted and systematic persecution. And those kind of sweeping statements do not really help them in getting an impression of what they so famously call the situation on the ground. So with SOGI-related questions, there's sometimes we feel like a certain disconnect between the information that we find and the information the decision maker feels he needs in order to make a fact-based decision, or for a matter of fact, that the legal advisor needs in order to form an argument. And obviously we know that data protection is extremely important for such a sensitive issue, and contacts on the ground need to be protected. But a little more information by the source on its methodology, so how many people were talked to and where, and what did they exactly record, would often be very useful for the source to carry some evidentiary weight in the end. And some sources that we find and also use are primarily advocacy focused, which is fine since this is their mandate. But putting advocacy sort of before reported facts, however, can sometimes make a source seem a bit less credible and therefore less likely to be accepted or relied on as COI. And this dissatisfaction with the source material became evident in Austria in 2018 when the second instance court, so the Court of Appeal, commissioned an expert to do some field work and to travel to Iraq to speak to different stakeholders about their attitudes towards LGBTI people. So he talked to some members of security forces, religious authorities, members of certain tribes. It's not a bad idea, speaking to people on the ground and gaining some first-hand information. However, the final court expert opinion based on this field trip turned out to be, again, very problematic from a methodological standpoint. So the key issues here were that this expert did not manage to gain any contact with LGBTIQ people on the ground. And then for the people that he did speak to, there were no transcripts of the interviews. So the statements of about 40 different people were summarized together for each kind of answer in about 100 words. So we feel that a lot of detail was lost. And then sometimes it also seemed that questions and answers seemed to have gotten lost in translation. So sometimes the answers didn't really match up with the questions. So that kind of made you wonder about the conversation situation that actually took place. And then I must say that this expert opinion in the end never made its way into decisions for international protection because the court expert was found to be unsuitable and dismissed over another expert opinion that he prepared on Afghanistan. But we do here kind of see the effort by the court to independently gain some country of origin information because they weren't really satisfied with the COI that was available and that was provided. So to sum it up, sources kind of help us the most if they are as transparent as possible in their reporting. And this means that they recount the facts as precisely as possible by supporting each of their claims with concrete and up-to-date facts, and also do not use overly emotive language. And all of this while also kind of protecting their informants. So we know that this is a very difficult balance, but only if this is done, then we can be transparent ourselves by scrutinizing the methodology of these sources and describing them to our clients in order to give them a better idea of our findings and to present them with reliable COI that actually will be used in the end. And yeah, this marks the end of my contribution, so thank you very much.